Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Jeff Hall. I'm an astronomer and the director of Lowell Observatory here in Flagstaff, coming to you from the Observing Plaza at our Giovanni Open Deck Observatory. And I'd like to welcome you to the first of a two-part webinar on estate gifts. Now, estate gifts have become increasingly important over particularly the past 20 years to the ongoing support and sustainability of the observatory. And we just wanted to offer some information as to how these types of gifts work. These webinars are being brought to you by the Lowell Observatory Foundation, which is a support entity for the observatory that was created only 6 years ago and already has more than $8 million in endowed gifts to support our mission in perpetuity. So we're going to be talking over the course of these webinars about 4 different types of estate gifts. As always, if you are planning these kinds of gifts, be sure to consult with professionals. There are a lot of complexities, but we're going to give you as much advice as we can from our perspective. So today, for the first webinar, we're going to talk to you about bequests. The observatory has long benefited from bequests. In fact, it goes right back to our early beginnings. When our founder, Percival Lowell, died in 1916, he bequeathed his estate to the observatory in what is now and still exists as the Percival Lowell Trust, a separate entity from the foundation, but one that's quite important to our ongoing financial viability. So to talk to you about bequests today, I'd like to introduce our development manager, Stephen Riggs. Stephen has been with us for about 3 years. He came to Lowell with fundraising background in arts and healthcare, as well as university settings. And he's going to be walking you through the presentation we have for you today with occasional color commentary from me. So I'll pass it over to Stephen.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I also want to reinforce something that Jeff said about seeking professional guidance when developing estate plans. Many of these estate vehicles involve legal documents and require complex financial planning in order to gain the greatest financial benefit and tax advantages for you and your family. Now, that said, the development team here at Lowell Observatory has between them literally decades of experience working with planned gifts, and we help supporters to get them started in the planning process, and we work with them to answer questions about how their estate gifts can best reach their financial or their philanthropic plans. Now, we have also seen in the course of this time how estate gifts of all sizes can do marvelous things for charitable organizations. And we have also seen some estate gifts that have presented challenges. And we'll talk about some of both today. But we are, as Jeff said, going to discuss bequests. And that's through your will or trust. And these are among the simplest and most common ways to leave a legacy. Everybody should have a will, no matter your age or the size of your estate. And I hope everyone watching this presentation either has a formal estate plan in place or is about to put one in place. Because if you don't have a plan and something happens to you, the government has a plan for your estate, and you may not like it. Now, that said, let's move on to some of the different types of bequests. And I'll share just a few of the most common, the ones that we tend to see most of here at the observatory. The first is very simple. It's a bequest of a specific dollar amount. And just like it says, it's I hereby bequeath X amount of dollars, 500, 5,000, 500,000 to whatever nonprofit that you choose. And there are a couple of things that you need to be careful of in here. First of all, you do need to name the organization. And it really helps if you put in a descriptor in there, like the address. But the most important thing that you need to include is the federal tax ID number. Now, with the observatory, with the trust, with the foundation, these numbers, these ID numbers can be found on our website. But if you don't want to go doing a deep dive through all 3 of the websites, or the 2 websites rather, you can just call one of the development officers here and we can get that to you without a problem at all. Why don't we go to the next slide here? which is a percentage bequest. And this is one that is becoming more and more common these days. And it's just like it says, it's a bequest of a percent of your estate. And that can be a percent of your total estate, or it can be a percent of the remainder of the estate after other commitments have been met. And we have seen several of these in recent years, one of which has become a tremendous asset to the foundation and through that to the observatory. And I'm going to let Jeff talk about that one.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, and it's actually really a pleasure to talk about this one. We're here at the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory, and you can see one of the 6 telescopes in the background. Just off screen is another one that was a gift of the gentleman I'm going to talk about, whose name was Don. He was a longtime member of the observatory and member of our advisory board. He joined the advisory board back around 2000. And really, we became an extension of his family. He attended the board meetings religiously. He had great input and supported us generously throughout his life. And he left us essentially not quite 100%, but very close to of his entire estate. Before he passed away just over a year ago, after a very sad decline from cancer. Don was, I'm particularly grateful to Don in my experience as someone who's kind of backed into fundraising from a career in astronomy. You know, I will say, when in the context of talking about planned gifts and estate gifts, it used to feel somewhat uncomfortable because we were talking about end-of-life issues and all of this, but seeing the joy that it brought Don to know that his estate, 96% of it probably, was going to go into the Lowell Observatory Foundation and support our mission of research and communicating science forever. I was able to visit him last year, just 3 weeks before he died, and it brought him a lot of peace and comfort. And it was just wonderful to be able to do that. And so, I've sort of come to understand that these are gifts that can be very meaningful, particularly, I know many of the names on the registrant list here. When they're coming from someone who's been long involved with Lowell, it's such a pleasure to know all of you and to help people know that their lifetime estate is going to support a really good thing forever and ever. So Don is one example, and part of the reason, his estate just came in over the past year. And the reason that the corpus of the foundation is now in excess of $8 million, which is a very substantial new source of support, a meaningful source of support to what we do. So those kinds of things are really transformative. In Don's case, he asked that his estate simply go into the general fund, where it will generally support the general operations of the observatory and just keep us going. We are eternally grateful to remember him in the foundation, as well as through one of the magnificent instruments here at the Gut.
Now, as Jeff mentioned, this was a rather large estate, but I do want to reinforce the idea that you don't have to have a large estate in order to give through a bequest. In fact, we typically see 3 or 4 estate gifts each year at the observatory. Very few of them are that large. And everyone who makes an estate plan generally can leave a little something to some type of organization that means something to you. So keep that in mind. You don't have to have a large estate in order to make a bequest. It can be a very small one. But the important thing is to do something with it, to leave your legacy somewhere. Now, why don't we go to the next slide here, which is a contingent bequest. And this is a type of bequest that provides for a spouse, family member, friend, so forth, before all else. And this is rather common. And you will also see that if they predecease, then there can be a remainder that goes to that organization. And you'll often see this in combination with a percentage bequest or a bequest of a specific dollar amount. So this is something that we see quite a lot of. This is how my own estate plan is set up. And this is something that you might want to give some thought to if there are people involved that you want to make sure receive the support first. All right. Now, the next one is something just a little bit less common, but we do see it from time to time, and it's a bequest of real estate. A few things to keep in mind about this one. If you are going to give real estate, then you need to give a full description of that property in your will. It can either be an address or, better yet, it should be the legal description of that property. Now, bequest of real estate can be a little tricky. Most organizations have very stringent guidelines about the acceptance of real estate. We are no exception. And the reason for that is to make sure that we do not, or the other organizations that you may give something to, does not accept a piece of property that's more of a liability than an asset. At one of the universities that I worked with, before I got there, they accepted a bequest of a piece of property sight unseen. They did not have any acceptance guidelines. They just said, okay, we'll get this. And then they went and looked at the property. As it turns out, it was on the side of a very tall, very rocky hill. It had very limited access, think goat path, no utilities, and it was surrounded on all sides by private property. They ended up paying property taxes on this piece of real estate for 20 years before they could do something with it. They ended up selling it to a cell company to put a tower on it, but the sale price was a good bit less than what they had paid over the years in taxes. The other thing to keep in mind about real estate is that most organizations have a policy of turning around and selling that property, and then using the proceeds to fund whatever the donor wishes to have those dollars go for. We're also no exception on that. Much like a gift of stock, we'll turn around, put it on the market, and try to realize some type of a cash value for that. There can be some exceptions to that. If the organization can actually use the property in some fashion, or if they can leverage that property for some type of other gain down the road, then they may keep it. And about a year ago, I had the honor of working on a bequest of real estate that we ended up keeping part of, and we used part of that as leverage for a much greater gain. And it has really become one of the jewels in the observatory's portfolio. And I'm going to let Jeff talk about that one, because that was a very interesting process.
It certainly was, Stephen. And this is a request from a wonderful lady named Diane, who I actually never had the opportunity to meet, because I only learned of this fairly late in her life, but it was a bequest of real estate. And to set the stage for this, we over past 20 years, we built the Lowell Discovery Telescope out near Happy Jack, Arizona. As the telescope was nearing completion, about a mile away down the hill, there's a set of private inholdings, probably 8 or 9 parcels, sort of surrounded by the Coconino National Forest. One of those parcels came on the market in 2010. It was a 23-acre parcel with a cabin on it. And we bought that to provide a lodge for our telescope observers and our astronomers, because it's about 45 miles out to the Lowell Discovery Telescope and just a little bit far to have people driving back through elk-infested roads after an all-nighter. It just doesn't seem like the best plan. So this is a fairly small cabin with three bedrooms, and it served us pretty well. It turns out Diane owned a parcel immediately to the south. It was about 35 acres, and she bequeathed that real estate to us. And on that parcel, She also had a cabin, but there is also a detached garage. So when we looked at the property, actually the cabin itself was a bit nicer and a bit more spacious than the one we had, although given the layout, I suspect it was the same builder. And then the garage had a fully enclosed, livable loft. And so this was a larger and more flexible space for our staff than we had with the previous property. So what we did is we accepted the bequest. And now, at that point, we had 35 plus 23 acres. We had 58 acres out there at Happy Jack. So basically, we've kept 10 with Diane's house and garage loft. The house now serves as an astronomer's quarters. And now there's this very nice separate loft apartment for all of our telescope observers to rest after a night, an all-nighter helping the astronomers collect their data. So we've got 10 acres. And then we took the remaining 48 and split them into 4 parcels to get better market value than just selling off a big chunk. Right like that, we sold 3 of the 4. And just yesterday, I passed back to our Deputy Director for Administration, Ann Labruso, my approval of a verbal offer and some very minor conditions on the 4th parcel. And so within several months, we will have sold all 4 for a net market value of about $1 million, which then we have put into the Percival Lowell Trust, one of our support entities. So this is really a case of doing both of the things that Stephen said before. We were able to use the bequest to enhance our operational support capacity out there at Happy Jack, and then to sell the remaining land, which we really don't need 60 acres out there. So use that to support the observatory financially. So this was the case where it was really a no-brainer to accept the bequest with tremendous gratitude to Diane. And in honor of her and her husband, we renamed one of the buildings at the Lowell Discovery Telescope site in their honor to memorialize the wonderful contribution that they made to the observatory.
And it is a beautiful piece of property. All right. Well, at this point, I'd like to talk about just some takeaway things. First of all, consider family and friends first. Always people first before organizations. But if you do give to an organization, please understand that they will accept it gratefully, as will we. The other thing, again, consult with an attorney, because wills and trusts are legal documents, and the rules of their governance can vary from state to state. So you want to make sure that your plan conforms to all legal requirements. The other thing, consider what you wish to bequeath and how. And some of the ways that we've discussed can be the how. You can determine what. The 4th thing is to specify, and this is really important, specify in your will how you want your gift used. Do you want it to go to support a specific program, like astronomy research or outreach? Do you want it to go to a specific endowment fund, such as the Exploration Fund or the Inspiration Fund? Or do you want it to go to just general operating? All of those are wonderful choices, and all are valuable in their own right. The other thing I'd like to remind you is to please consult with a charitable organization and let them know of your intentions. Because when we have that, when we know what you're thinking, when we know what you would like to do with your estate, then we can get that recorded. And if personnel change, then we have a record of this. And if something does happen down the road and we receive your estate, then we know exactly what to do with it. So please talk to a development officer at some point before you finalize your estate plan. And then, very, very important, please give the organization contact information for your attorney, your fiduciary agent, and or your executor. And this can avoid a number of problems down the road. And we have encountered those in past years. And one was rather interesting that happened before my time here, but Jeff knows all about it, and I'm going to let him tell you some of these pitfalls.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Stephen. And just to tip our sleeve, though, this does have a happy ending. But this is the story of a wonderful couple who were long-term supporters of the observatory, members of the Friends. We would regularly see them up here for events. They lived down in Phoenix. I had a chance to visit with them several times. We had some common interests. They used to love to go to Oregon Stop Pizza down there in Tempe, which is one of the coolest places you can possibly go if you live down in the valley. And they had let us know that we were generously remembered in their estate. And they died. The wife died around 2012, and the husband about a year later. And we didn't have much information from them. And so, we waited to be contacted, which has typically been the case. Even when a benefactor has not informed us, we'll get a letter. This happened to me in 2010. I got a letter out of the blue from a gentleman in England who had left us part of his estate, and we'd never had any contact from him before. So we kind of waited for this letter, and it never came. And my feeling was, both of these individuals had fairly lengthy end-of-life health issues, and there were, I know, a lot of expenses, and we figured, well, maybe that drained the reserves somewhat, or people sometimes change their minds. And so we assumed that this had just been one of those that had gone a different direction, until about, at least, this was when you were here, Stephen, at this point. So probably 3-4 years later, we got an email from one of these account resolution entities or companies, and they are willing, they discovered a delinquent account, and they pointed this to us, and it was this pot of money. And of course, they were quite eager to help us resolve this problem for a very slight nominal fee, naturally. And we declined that generous offer and turned our own crack team loose on it and figured out, in fact, it was this estate. And the firm that was supposed to execute the estate basically had dropped the ball. And whether that was out of cluelessness or deviance, I really don't know, but they didn't do the job. And we eventually had to retain our own counsel to get in touch with them and clear his throat very loudly. And after a while, everything was indeed resolved. But there were a lot of complexities because the money had been sitting there for several years and taxes hadn't been paid and none of the papers were in order. It was kind of a mess, but we eventually did sort it out. And so I think this is an example of the kind of confusion can happen when some of these important things aren't in order, when an organization doesn't know what your final intent was, when you don't have a good point of contact. We had no idea who to call to see how to check on these people's estate. And from their point of view, their desires for their lifetime earnings were not being met. And that would be a tragic thing to happen if an organization didn't know what your intent was. So that's just a good object lesson on exactly the points Stephen was just raising. So, communicate. You can never communicate too much.
All right. Also, don't assume that your will or trust will cover everything, such as retirement accounts or life insurance. Beneficiary listings on life insurance and retirement plans supersede, in most cases, what is written in the will. So you need to make sure that both documents are in alignment with each other. The other thing that I want to caution about is putting conditions in your will without first consulting the organization. And the reason for that is that things change. And things change within the organization, they can change within the donor's field of interest, and the simpler it is, the better and easier it's going to be for everybody concerned. I am currently working with the estate of a longtime supporter and volunteer here who put such a condition in his will. And this happened about 18 years ago. And at that time, we had a particular program that was the subject of this condition. Things have changed in the past 18 years. It's not structured the way that it was at that time. And the donor himself did not follow through on some critical issues. The result was he passed away unexpectedly, very suddenly, and that condition was not met. And therefore, the organization that he cared so much about and made a fairly significant gift to which was Lowell Observatory, which we were not able to receive the bequest that he had set out in his will. It's gone. The conditions were not met. End of story. Except that the story hasn't ended yet. So there is a possibility that through another mechanism, the observatory will still get something from this individual, and it will certainly go to the area that he originally intended, and it is something that he thought very highly of and utilized when he was alive. So that brings us to the last point, which is periodically review your estate plan. Drag it out, dust it off, read through it, and make sure that it still conforms to your interest and to your philanthropic intent. So I'd like to, on that note, go to a point of contact, which is for more information about bequest. Obviously, consult your financial advisor or your attorney, or you can contact one of the development officers here at Lowell Observatory, Lisa Actor, Bruce Kosevich, myself, or you can go, if we can go to the next slide, to the website, which is lowellgiftlegacy.com. That's part of the Lowell Observatory Foundation website. But there you can get things like the tax ID numbers, and you can also request an estate planning guide, which kind of helps you to organize your thoughts about what you want. It also explains some of the different types of estate plans, such as charitable annuities, life insurance, retirement plans, and so forth. And it really helps things when you fill this out and go through that workbook. It makes the whole process go a little faster and much easier for you. So that is a service that we offer. You can get in touch with me and I can send you one electronically, or I can mail you one. It's a booklet of about 18 or so pages. And I think that you would find it quite helpful. So in closing, you can't take it with you. So you might as well do something with your assets to help your family, your friends, and your favorite charitable organization, and leave a legacy that will last. And leaving a bequest through wills or trust is one way to do so. Jeff?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Stephen. So yeah, just by way of conclusion, I'd like to say thanks for joining us. Hope particularly the information here, but also the specific examples we've been able to share with you of a bequest and a real estate gift, as well as a situation where something got a little complicated, have been useful in seeing, and as just examples of how these things play out in real life, as it were. Let's look and see if we do have Q&A here. Yeah, from Stephen Brown, could you please expand on point number 7? And
point number 7. Go back to point number 7. Don't assume that your trust or will cover everything, because some things, such as retirement accounts and life insurance, can supersede, in most cases, wills or trusts. What you put on your beneficiary line of your life insurance policy or your retirement plan comes first. Doesn't really matter what you put in your will. If you have another person or another organization listed in your life insurance policy, your retirement account, that will take precedence over anything that is in your will or your trust. So keep that in mind. And that's, again, one good reason to drag out your will every now and then. Make sure that it aligns with both your interests and your other forms of estate plans. I hope that, Stephen, answered your question about that. If you have specific questions on this type of thing, you can always contact me after this and we can talk through some of them. There are 3 entities here that we have mentioned that you can leave an estate gift to: the observatory, the foundation, or the trust. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So these are indeed 3 different entities. You can give directly to the observatory. Gifts to the observatory typically go to support our ongoing operations or capital projects, such as the Astronomy Discovery Center. We get gifts for a lot of our scientific and technical projects, for instance, the development of a new instrument. Bricks and mortar projects like our instrument shop over here were supported with gifts directly to the observatory. So that is one avenue. We mentioned earlier the Percival Lowell Trust, which is the original estate of Percival Lowell. The trust is managed by the observatory's sole trustee, Lowell Putnam, and it can be preserved or it can be used to support the observatory. One of the critical things it's done for us recently, Lowell reserved a portion of the corpus of the trust when we had to close due to COVID-19. And that underpinning helps us weather some of these storms. The trust has recently been restructured in a way that it can be contributed to. So gifts to support the observatory in more of an opportunistic way can be given to the trust. However, the trust by itself, as an endowment, we rapidly realized in the era of LDT that it was not large enough to support the full operations of the observatory. So in 2014, we created the Lowell Observatory Foundation, which is a separate, not-for-profit entity whose payouts are solely restricted to support the mission of the observatory. Unlike the trust, the foundation is governed by a full board of trustees. This was a deliberate response to the very sensible concerns that some donors have about donating to an entity governed by only one individual. This is a more traditional governance format that we have with the foundation, and gifts into the foundation can be permanently restricted. And they can be deposited into a number of different funds for general support of the observatory. Or you heard Stephen mention, the Exploration Fund, which supports science, if that's your inclination, or the Inspiration Fund, which supports our outreach efforts. And gifts in here can be specified by the donor to be permanently restricted. So you will have assurance that your assets will not be spent in the future by a intemperate director or something like that. So these are the 3 different conduits. They have slightly different purposes, but all 3 solely directed to supporting the mission of discovery and outreach that we carry out here at Lowell.
Yes, and I happen to be a big fan of foundations and endowments, because if you are giving your life savings to an organization, for me, it seems like it is very appropriate to put it into some type of a fund that is permanently endowed that will support the organization essentially in perpetuity. And that can be a powerful legacy to leave behind. Yeah. So let's see if we have any other questions. If there's no fund designated, is there a default fund that the donation will go to? Jeff, I'll let you answer that.
So that's for the foundation?
Yep.
Yeah, so if it's undesignated, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we would put it into what is the general fund, basically.
Pretty much.
Of the foundation. So, if the donor doesn't designate it to support something specific, we will put it into the general fund of the foundation. And the general fund is just, we have the standard payout policy per year that's based on a certain, I think it's 4% of the 4% of the earnings. And that will just generally go to support the operating expenses of the observatory for the year to come. And like I said before, some of these are restricted, some of these are unrestricted, but when the corpus is up over 8 million, 4% starts to get to be a really meaningful number that makes a material difference to what we're able to do. So from Bob Filler, hi Bob, a little off topic of bequest, but foundation is not eligible for IRS RMDs?
That is correct. And that is one of those odd little rules by the IRS, but you cannot give through certain types of estate vehicles, such as donor advised funds, certain types of retirement accounts, directly to a supporting organization, which would include the Lowell Observatory Foundation. You would need to, in those cases, make the bequest for those types of vehicles. You would need to make that directly to Lowell Observatory, and then you can put those dollars to use. But you can talk to the development officer and try to work out something that will meet your expectations and yet maintain, stay within the confines of the tax code.
Okay.
All right.
So let's see. So that's answer 2 up in 1. From anonymous attendee, can you explain how endowments work? The basics of an endowment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Happy to do that. An endowment, you put money into a fund that is essentially invested. It is restricted. The fund will not use the corpus of that fund. It will only use the earnings from those investments for the specific purpose that is outlined in that endowment fund. In the case of the exploration fund, that one goes to support astronomical research here at the observatory. So if you were to leave, let's say, $100,000 to go into one of these endowment funds, such as the exploration fund, your money would stay there. Any earnings above 4% would be put back into the corpus of the fund to help grow it. And then that 4% of your gift would be used for the purpose of that endowed fund. And that is permanent. So no one can get into that fund and use it for any other purpose. It really, except in extreme circumstances where the organization might fold, which we haven't done in 125 years. We're probably not going to do that for another 125 years. So for all intents and purposes, that is a permanent investment.
Right. And it's amazing how, if it was 100,000, as you used in your example, so what you would do is invest that with a firm that was, you hope, savvy enough to say earn 6% in a year.
Yes. And
we would get 4,000, which is the 4% payout from the 100. And then the next year, your 100 is grown to 102. Mm-hmm. And, it might seem like $4,000 is only a fairly small part of a $12 million operating budget. But I can tell you, it's amazing how much of a difference it can make when to somebody's productivity or just morale when they say, this is going to cost $3K. Can we do this? And you can say yes. Even that can acquire something that makes a material difference to someone's ability to be productive and really contribute to the success of the mission. So these kinds of things are incredibly valuable to us, whether, all gifts, great and small.
And think about some of the older universities in this country, and particularly in Europe, that had endowments that were started hundreds of years ago, small amounts, and they are worth millions today, and they are generating millions today for the original purpose.
Right. Okay. See anything else come in? So Lisa Actor writes, this is true. I think this is going back to the RMD question. This is true for RMDs during a person's lifetime. They can name the foundation as a beneficiary after their death. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Any other questions? I think that's probably it this time.
For this time.
So
with that, this time we'll see you next Friday, same time, same channel, and look forward to seeing you then.